The topic of legalizing marijuana in the Americas has been back in the forefront of conversations in recent weeks. Latin American governments traditionally allied with the U.S. on anti-drug efforts are becoming more divided. In September, officials from the 35 members of the Organization of American States met in Guatemala to address and debate counter-narcotics policies. At the same time, the Mexican state of Jalisco is in the process of approving a plan to allow marijuana for medicinal purposes. Public pressure has been building to legalize the drug after Uruguay and the U.S. states of Washington and Colorado authorized its sale and use. Joining us now to discuss these developments is our political analyst, Laura Carlson. She joins us now from Mexico City. Laura, welcome. Can we see a regional agreement on legalizing marijuana in the coming months?
No, I don't think we're going to see in the short term a region-wide agreement. And this is mainly because of the position, as you mentioned, of the United States and its allies. The United States is heavily invested in a drug war, a full-on attack on the drug cartels that will reinforce its own prohibitionist policies, being the major market, of course. So we see a region rather, that's divided, where there's strong calls from countries that have been heavily invested in the drug war, such as Guatemala and, of course, Colombia, to look at new approaches, including legalization, and yet there's been a lot of pushback from the United States. So they reached a consensus agreement on having a new approach in very general terms and on looking at this as a health agreement, which is important as a health issue, and with a lot of talk about seeing drug users as people who require treatment rather than repressive and disciplinary measures. But in terms of having something bold and new and a consensus on the regional basis, we won't be seeing that in the near future.
So what is the logic behind legalization?
Well, the logic behind legalization varies a little bit from one country to another. In Uruguay, which has legalized marijuana, what they're saying is the opposite of the traditional argument that marijuana is a gateway drug to harder drugs. And what they're saying is if we separate this out into a separate legal market, then people who smoke marijuana will not be going underground and dealing with dealers who will sell them harder drugs. And they're hoping then to get control of something that's relatively harmless within society in order to focus efforts on the harder drugs that are much more harmful both to health and to society in terms of crime and violence. This is the opposite of what Peña Nieto, for example, just said to Bloomberg when he was in New York, that in fact he was against marijuana because it would open up to other drugs. Other countries are saying that this has to be seen as a health issue, that users are not criminals in the traditional sense, and they need to find treatment and rehabilitation. And also, in the case of Guatemala in particular, what he's saying, the president of Guatemala, Otto Pérez Molina, is that we don't want to do the United States dirty work. We're putting up with high levels of crime and violence in our countries in order to enforce prohibitionist policies in the United States, and it's not working.
Well, Laura, I want to add to that because more than 1 million people are arrested in the United States for drug-related offenses. That is who takes up a lot of room in the prisons here. Can Latin America do the same, or is there enough room for people with drug offenses in those countries?
No, even if Latin American countries wanted to apply this disciplinary and repressive model of a drug war, 100% in their countries, actually arresting everyone who consumed or trafficked illegal drugs. There's no way they could do it, and they don't want to do it. They consider it a waste of resources. In the United States, the vast majority of people who are in the prisons, and it has the largest prison population in the world, are in there for drug offenses. The majority of those being non-violent drug offenses, often even simple possession. Latin American countries already have major problems in their prisons with overcrowding, and they have no desire whatsoever to follow this path of the United States. Here in Mexico, we've been having problems recently because under the Merida Initiative, there's a lot of work being done to certify Mexican prisons with the same type of model used in the United States. And prisoners have been striking, they've been on strike, they've been holding protests, the families have been protesting because the additional disciplinary measures that go along with that have not not been accompanied by any kind of improvements in the prison system. So the model that's being imposed in terms of prisons from the United States is causing a lot of conflict, and Latin American countries on the whole are sure that they really do not want to go that route.
You mentioned that President Enrique Peña Nieto and his government in Mexico are against legalization, but obviously there are some there who are looking towards drug policy reforms. What do ordinary Mexicans think about all this? Do they have the support of the Mexican people?
Well, we don't have a really good reading on that. There are occasional nationwide polls, but the samples are small. And the most important thing that we've seen lately is the popular consultation that was carried out in the state of Jalisco that you mentioned. And there, the vast majority of people who turned out for the consultation, it wasn't obligatory, were in favor of medical marijuana for the state. So this is really a big change in many ways. The other place where we've seen this attitude of breaking down the zero tolerance for drugs kind of drug war model is in Mexico City. In Mexico City, at the beginning of this year, the legislature was presented with a bill, a proposal that would legalize marijuana and create legal sales outlets within the city. And there's a very good possibility that that could pass. Right now, we don't know the timing of it, but there seems to be strong support. So in the past, when you had significant resistance, and there's a lot of fear of anything that could even possibly empower drug cartels because of the violence and the havoc that they're wreaking here in the country. But in the past, where we had a pretty outright rejection of drug policy reform, that's beginning to erode, and we're seeing particularly certain parts of the country and sectors of society that are saying, we know that what we've been doing doesn't work, and it's time to try something new.
All right, America's Now political analyst Laura Carlson, thank you so much for joining us from Mexico City.